On this episode of Les Roll
So
Radio,
kind of to
we
wrap
discuss
all of
the
this
importance
up,
of self-awareness.
growth requires honesty. And so you can't improve if you can't see where you are.
This is Les Roll
currently.
Radio, a combat sports
think that's important
podcast.
for
I'm
everybody
Kelly
to know.
Shinicki.
And I'm Andrea
Self-awareness
Shinicki. Welcome to the
isn't
podcast.
about recognizing weakness. It's also about knowing what's working so you can build from that. Sorry.
So I think a really good illustration of today's topic, which is self-awareness, is actually from this past weekend. You went to the Arnold Classic
I did.
on your own, which is now the case sometimes.
Yes.
If it's too far away, you go solo. And you did your absolutes first. So you had a no-gi absolute. And the way they do it is with everyone.
Yes, for the no-gi, yeah.
So you had white belts through brown belts.
well, actually, I think for gi too, even.
But you only had a purple belt. in
I
your
only
gi
had a
absolute.
purple, yeah.
And you lost your first. Those are single elimination, right? So you lost those matches. You had a brown belt though in your no-gi,
Yeah.
and then you won your gi bracket, all
Yes.
submissions, right? And then you withdrew from no-gi. Why?
I withdrew from no-gi because my hip hurt. I hurt it during my matches.
And you have a gimp hip anyway.
I've got
a
a
bad
bad
hip. And then going back, you called me right after your second match, which was your gi absolute match, and you said you thought you wanted to come home.
Yes.
But you didn't.
'Cause
So
you-
again, self-awareness.
Right.
What happened there?
You told
with
me
both.
you told me I needed to eat lunch.
Just that.
Just that. You're like, maybe you'll feel better after you eat lunch.
I mean, kind of, right? And I think Jacob, you were messaging Jacob, one of our coaches, and he said, have you had enough water? I mean, like, really, like, those were like the conversations even from a distance.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, that was a warm-up. You're admitting you've eaten food but not drank any water. Your muscles are on fire.
I kept saying that.
I think you had like an hour and 45 minutes or something between you
Yeah.
or whatever. So it was like, you've come all this way. It's still early in the day because you were really, really early with your first two matches.
first matches of the day.
Yeah. I think you literally were like the second match, right?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. And jiu-jitsu, you were literally, by the way, the first match. So you've been really early.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Granted, it started at 1, but still, it's still the first adult match
Mm-hmm.
on that mat. But yeah, so like it was a situation where it wasn't like, it was midnight and you're like, I want to go home and right now. It was
Yes.
early in the day.
Yeah.
So we said, perhaps we like try some things, reevaluate after like a little bit and we've rested. So then you were able to carry on and win.
My gi division.
Yes. But you made then a different decision for no-gi.
Yes, I did choose to withdraw from the no-gi.
Again, because self-awareness being you don't want to use injuries as an excuse or like feeling a certain way. So having to balance
Those feelings.
those
Yeah.
feelings, right?
Yes, yeah. Because if I would have not done the gi division, it would have been not because of not a good reason. I didn't have a good reason.
You were
Not-
tired.
I was tired. I was exhausted.
And you lost 2 matches, so like that feels shitty.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then after I won those 2 matches, I was like,
You're on a high, if anything, and you would be facing those girls again
yes, yeah,
in no-gi,
yeah,
right? So I said those things to you. I'm like, you're fighting the same people who you just beat. You could definitely win this bracket. And you were like, no, I physically am limping.
yes,
Like,
yeah.
and so then that's a good, yeah. So a self-aware queen. We love it. So that leads us into today's topic perfectly, why self-awareness matters. And I think it's the most important thing in not just training combat sports. I think in professional life, any hobbies, anything you do that you're trying to improve at and get better at, if you are not able to, as objectively as one can when you're evaluating yourself, see your strengths and weaknesses, you really can't have meaningful progress. And this can kind of go both ways. If you have a lot of ego, that can create blind spots. You can overestimate your skill. And then on the flip side, if you're really insecure or very self-deprecating, that can make you doubt yourself unnecessarily. And I think that women in particular are really bad about that, seeming insecure or being self-deprecating. That's the thing I'm working on. Like, I tend to trash certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, yeah, like I do a limited amount of things on top. I am a guard player. I'm not ashamed of that, but my passing is good.
Yeah.
Like I've worked really hard to make sure that my passing is, I think, above average for my time in. Like that's a thing I focus a lot of attention on because I want to be good at that. And I need to stop being self-deprecating and acting like I'm trash on top. So both are going to be problematic, right? Like if you're too egocentric, if you have too much, I don't know, like overestimation again of the skill, or on the flip side, if you're really, really insecure about it. So question, have you ever had a time where you realized you weren't as good at something as you thought, or bad? You realized you weren't as bad at something as you thought, and like how did that impact or change your training?
For a really long time, I thought I was only a guard player and that I didn't really have a top game at all. And then after my hip stuff started, I started playing top more. And now I kind of feel like, oh, my top game isn't like complete trash. If anything,
I think it's better.
it's well, especially now, but like it's pretty good. Like I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah.
So that was something as soon as we talked about this question, I'm like, oh shit. Yeah. My top game's pretty good. But I thought it was really bad for a very long time.
Is there anything that you thought you were really good at that at some point you were like, oh, I'm not as good at that? And I don't mean like things with your hip, because that's like an injury, or, you know.
Armbar escapes?
You thought you were really good at them?
Oh, so before
and then you got surprised.
Before I really truly realized that I got hit with arm bars all the time, I was like, I don't get hit with arm locks very much. And then it's just felt like left, right, getting hit with
Wait,
arm.
there was a time where you didn't?
I
That must have been
thought
before. That must have been before I knew you.
Excuse you. I thought. I didn't really like notice. And then, of course, every tournament I went to, I was getting arm barred. I'm like, why is this not happening in the gym as much? But it's just, I don't think I was like focused on it or thinking really about it.
And then other people point it out and they're like, I think that that's
Yeah.
really important, right? Because sometimes you don't notice something and then you actually think like it's going well or fine. I don't know that I have a very specific example, but I've had things with passing where I work with Jacob on passing and I feel really good about it. And then he's like, you are consistently doing this. And so for me with that is actually like, if I pressure pass, I'm fine. Or if I float, like if I do a floating pass, I'm fine. I'm really bad in the transition between them. So I almost have to like very early on commit to one or the other. I'm not good at flowing between them. My weight shifts and I'm easy to sweep. I didn't know that until that was specifically pointed out to me. And I was kind of like, oh crap. So that's something I thought I was better at. And then, you know, again, I like to pride myself on being self-aware, but I did not recognize that that was a thing until someone said
Mentioned
something.
it, yeah.
And then I would say still the kind of like with things I thought I was bad at, I would say maybe some of the top stuff too, right? Like I also, maybe because it was like trying to have humility or like whatever, I'm always like, oh yeah, I'm trash on top. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't like being here. And I'm like, actually, even though I do a limited amount of things, I'm pretty good at XYZ. And then it was there was a point where someone made a comment about me like never wanting to be on top. And you were like, you almost exclusively sweep and finish me on top.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I do. But I didn't even like recognize that. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually submitting more from top positions than I am from bottom. And I didn't really recognize that. So yeah, that's kind of my example. So, you know, if you do have poor self-awareness, some of the pitfalls are, again, if you overestimate your skill, you're probably going to ignore details, ignore problems, and not progress. You're going to have more plateaus. And I think that leads to frustrations.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that sometimes where people have maybe like an overinflated sense of either their skill generally, or sometimes like you'll see them either like compete or roll and then they feel very good and positive about it. And I don't mean that to sound like bad. Like I think it's fine to be like, yeah, I did my best, but I don't mean that. I mean like where they think it actually went well and it was like objectively not great.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's hard because then you also see them maybe like slow to get promoted, or you see them like getting hit with the same things over and over again. And then they get frustrated, but it's because they don't know that they're maybe struggling more than they think because they have an overinflated sense of their skill.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, if you underestimate, you're going to miss opportunities. I think there's a lot of hesitation in rolling. It's why a lot of people, again, going back to women who tend to do this, sometimes are a little less assertive rolling early on. Like I think it takes women in particular more time to gain that confidence and feel like they can be assertive in rolling. I see that a ton. And then, also confirmation bias in rolling, see what you want to see instead of what actually happened. I think that happens all the time too.
Oh, definitely.
Is that we have like a certain perception of what's happening. And so then again, we can't really be fully objective. And then also if you're trying to roll to win instead of trying to actually learn, I think you're also reinforcing bad habits. Not to say that you can't roll to win if you are getting ready for a competition, for example, and you're in the 6 weeks or, couple weeks before a competition and you're just rolling hard, rolling to win, rolling to be dominant, score points, submit, whatever. But if throughout the rest of the year, the times where you're not getting ready for competition, you're not vulnerable and exploring new things, developing, you're going to be stagnant as well. So have you ever trained with someone who's refused to acknowledge those weaknesses and and again, no names, and we both know so many people that I think we can be vague with this.
Oh, definitely.
But that it's in some way like impacted their progress.
So I don't know if I have a specific example of someone who refused to acknowledge a weakness, but let's say I see something and I mention it to a person. I've had people who say, yes, I understand, and then just ignore that advice.
Either because they don't see it the same way or...
Yeah. I mean, either they don't see it the same way...
Or they don't value the feedback.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to find a...
nice way of saying that.
Yeah. Which, it is whatever.
I think this is hard because if you're someone's coach, that's a very different relationship than being like a peer mentor. And that's a very different relationship from being just a peer, right? So we have kind of like those different relationships with different people. I feel like the people who either I teach that like, come to my classes or that I have like that peer mentorship relationship with, the ones that do best are the ones that I don't have to like push my feedback onto them. They actually ask for it.
Yes. Yeah.
And more specifically, they ask about specific things. If you're just like, what am I doing that's crappy? That's a really hard and broad question.
And
because we're all kind of fucking up all the time.
I was
right?
going to say, you might not feel great if someone just gives you a whole list of things you're not doing well
because
at.
like whatever, like we're all trying to get better,
Right.
and there's a whole list for all of us.
Yes, exactly.
But if you're like, I am specifically having trouble with, even if it's just a couple things, or these positions, or like whatever, or this is, I don't know, or I don't know what's happening in this particular situation. Like those are the people that are the easiest to help. Actually, you are sometimes hard with this.
I've thought you might mention that. Continue.
I think you've gotten better about it recently, but like I'm always like, hey buddy, are you just being gentle with me or whatever? We've gotten to a place where I'm like, do you want feedback from me or not? Because I felt like early on you really didn't. When it got to a place where I felt like I was able to give it to you, where I knew enough jujitsu to actually be able to give you feedback, I would like to receive it from you, and I don't always get it from you.
I don't know what's going on half the time.
Unconscious competence, which we'll get to. But I do see things, and I'm like, do you want feedback or do you not? And I think it was hard for you early on. And then later you're like, you know what? I want to get good. Give it to me. So now we're at a place where I feel like I can do that. So I don't think it was that you
Refused.
refused. Well, maybe a little bit, but like you didn't really you weren't as receptive to it early on. And now I just say, do you want, like, basically, do you want to be coddled, or do you want really direct and specific feedback about something that's going on that I either see in a match or I see you doing in roles, because I roll with you more than anyone, or I saw you doing in a role with someone else, or in drilling. And so I just ask, and that's my approach now. And sometimes you're not receptive to it because you're not in the mood for it at that moment, and that's
Right.
valid. And then, but most of the time you're like, yeah, tell me, right? And then we figure it out, and it's fine.
So I don't refuse anymore.
Most of the time, not.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all nice. Like, we understand what makes self-awareness, but how can people actually develop it if they don't already have it?
So objective reflection after training, what went well, what didn't go well, and are there patterns emerging that need to be discussed?
And I think some people do this very formally, right? Like, some people have like every single time I train, they write it in their journal, or they just make sure they talk through it, whatever, but they actually go through those. I've heard a lot of like professional athletes do that, where they list like a high, low, and then, like you said, what patterns did I see?
Another thing that can help is rolling with intention. So rolling with a goal in mind, something you are planning to do, wanting to do. And that could be for the week, for your one training session, or maybe even for the month. When you did our camp for last year, we had something we were doing every week.
Yes.
So we were rolling with intention.
Right. So there was like a focus of the week. So when we did drilling and we weren't rolling, we had a specific thing we drilled every week. And then we tried to start from those positions in rolling, or go to them as much as possible. But we were still doing full rolls, but there was a focus every single time. I think that was really helpful.
I think so too. You could also drill from your bad side. And I know you're a big advocate on doing that.
Yes. So I think that this is especially helpful if you've reached the point of unconscious competence and you're having a hard time. If you just don't know what's wrong because you just don't know what's going on, this isn't maybe as helpful. But if you're getting to the point where you really understand something pretty well and you're running into a problem, or you don't know what problems you may be having because there's so much unconscious competence there, because it's something that you've really have muscle memory developed, and you feel like you can do it very fluidly without thinking about it much, it can be actually a hindrance in some ways. So for me, like using K-Guard as an example, I feel like I have to put just a tiny bit more thought if I go to the left rather than the right, because I tend to enter on one leg on one side. And I play it both sides, but I have a favored side. So if I'm trying to do something and figure out why it's not working, actually doing it on my bad side is sometimes better, because I have to think through the steps a little bit more rather than just doing it without putting a lot of thought into my brain. And so it actually exposes weaknesses, because sometimes if you're really, really good at something, like if you're good at entering that thing, the reality is maybe when you're training, you're not getting it shut down too. So then if you start doing it either in drilling or in rolling on your bad side, because you have to slow down and think about it a little bit more, it'll expose more weaknesses. And if you have those weaknesses on your bad side, you actually probably have them on your good side. You're just not running into them as much. So the reality is, if someone's, I don't know, catching a leg in a specific way when you're entering K-Guard on your bad side, but it's not happening on your good side, the reality is it probably would happen with a higher level grappler on your good side. You probably have that same weakness and potential. I don't think a lot of times it's that you're just that shitty at doing it on your bad side, right? It's just not quite as finessed and not quite the same level of muscle memory. So that's kind of what I mean by that, is I think that that's helpful for exposing those things and applying it to your A game.
Yeah, and so I know we're talking about self-awareness, but I think seeking outside feedback could be super helpful.
Yeah, with that or with anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, getting another look.
Coaches, training partners, video reviews. There are people who offer that either like professionally paid or just friends. I think that can be really helpful, is like we were talking about earlier, just directly ask someone for that feedback too. you know, it doesn't always feel good when you like know kind of what you're doing and someone just gives you unsolicited feedback. So understandably, people are hesitant to do that. So
Right.
really like asking, because, you know, I don't know. I know what it feels like when you're workshopping something and you're like, I know, but thank you for pointing out that this is going poorly. I know, I'm working on it, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, don't kind of like expect that people are just going to offer that up. Actually ask for it directly.
Yeah, and I think something that we also struggle with just as people is detaching emotionality. I can't speak.
Emotionally.
Yes, detaching emotionally from our mistakes. So like we get very hurt when we make mistakes.
We beat ourselves up.
We beat ourselves up a lot. That's not good for your jiu-jitsu. It's not really good for you either in general. So we really need to stop beating ourselves up and use it more as understanding of what we need to be doing. How do we fix our mistakes?
I think it's fine to be emotional. I'm going to use a really off the wall example that has nothing to do with jiu-jitsu, but I raise and show rabbits. If people don't know that, I think I've probably mentioned that before. We raise and show rabbits. And I have not been active for a number of years, but I am a licensed rabbit judge. Fun fact, just like, you know, there are AKC dog judges. I do that with rabbits. And for a very long period of time was nationally competitive. I haven't meaningfully shown at the national level since before COVID. So who knows how it would go these days. But I don't say that. That sounds really like snooty. But I mean, truly like would win at like the Westminster, you know, of rabbit shows, right? So I have been elite at that hobby for decades. And like the thing, I have lots of flaws, but like the thing that has always made me great at doing that isn't necessarily purely the rabbits themselves. So their genetics, right? I mean, that's a huge piece of it. It's not even necessarily my understanding of how to breed them and how to do breeding combinations based on genetic possibilities, right? Like which things complement one another in breeding. It's not really any of that. It's every time I lose at a show, I look at it holistically and I look at all of the success and failure, even if I win, because there are times where you win and you shouldn't have.
Right.
I have had that happen many times. I don't have to tell anyone that.
Yeah.
But I need to know that and I need to be honest about that, because if I'm just like, I won, I'm the fucking best, that's not great. Also, if I lose, I need to be able to look at that objectively, right? And so I have to look at it and I have to say, okay, I lost and why did I lose and how do I correct that thing? So if it is I lost because the judge sucked, real talk, that is actually statistically most likely what happens. The breed that I raise, there's a lot of people struggle judging them. So the answer isn't that I need to do something with my herd. The answer is education of judges. There is still an outcome, right?
Yeah.
Like I need to be more active in the education of judges. Perhaps I need to present at more judges conferences, volunteer for that, whatever, provide materials for judges, whatever it is. Rather than get mad, get angry at that judge. At the end of the day, it's whatever. You can't control that. But what can you do going forward? If it is someone had a better rabbit won, what about it was better? What was lacking in my animals? And how can I fix that in the next generation?
Yeah.
Right? If it's that the animal wasn't moving as well as it should have on the table, that's not a structural thing. That's not a breeding thing. That is preparing the animal for the show. If the animal's coat wasn't good, that is not a structural thing.
Right.
That is conditioning. That is how I feed the animal. That's the weather, which, you know, is very hard to control, right? Especially in the Midwest. Like, so this is a really off the wall example, and I know I'm going on and on about it, but I really think that this is what makes people great at anything. And I think that you can apply the same to jiu-jitsu or any combat sport, where you think about it like data, like you said. I like that how you put that. You just think about it like data, and you don't have to tell anyone else these things. I think if you have trusted training partners, coaches, or whatever, and you can have the conversation openly and have kind of a team supporting you, that's great.
That's great.
But if that is too vulnerable, at least have that conversation vulnerably with yourself. and be honest about the good and the bad, because you just can't get better if you don't consider the outcome, good or bad, to be data. So I think it's also important to recognize that you have to do this even when you succeed, because maybe you shouldn't have,
Yeah.
or maybe you got lucky, or maybe like whatever. I mean, that's really important
Yeah, no.
to kind of understand that too,
I mean, if you want to be great, you have to understand.
where you're at
Yeah.
and how you stack up compared to other people. Because, you know, whether or not we like it, I know we talk about jujitsu being a personal journey, but I mean, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like that's true to a certain degree, but what makes someone great is relative to other people to a certain degree.
Yes.
It just is, right? That's how you measure. You have to have that measuring stick to a certain degree. So being able to do that in a kind of a data minded way.
Yes. So failure, use it as data, and it's not a personal attack on your skill.
Exactly.
I think that's just something that people forget. And I want to remind everyone, no one is personally attacking you when it comes to this.
No, it's not.
Well, how could you balance self-awareness regarding obstacles that are impacting your training without using them as an excuse for bad jiu-jitsu? For examples like illness or exhaustion, lack of athleticism, other
So
things.
this kind of goes back to like your hip thing over the weekend, which is why we led with that, right? I think that that's really tough, but again, I think the data point that you made like really distills this all down, but I think it's really like using that, and it's hard, but you know, there's probably a certain percentage a lot of times too. So like, you know, your hip was struggling, like you were having issues with that. And so it's important to recognize both, because there are factors that are not just your skill, right? Like you said, like athleticism, injury, exhausted, you're ill, you've been ill, whatever, you have things going on. And it's not like you can always perfectly gauge,
Yeah.
but you, and again, if you have people that you trust, can look at something and say, okay, like I'm just going to use your hip as an
Yes,
example,
yeah.
if that's okay. Your hip was bothering you, but more specifically, what were you having an issue with? So we could say it was literally just inside and outside rotation, right? Which is big. Your hip needs to be able to do that. So was the failure acute? Like it is not a thing that you chronically deal with in training, meaning it happened in the moment, it failed in the moment, couldn't have predicted that. Or is this a thing that you really should have made an adjustment for? Like, is this a thing going forward? So, you know, you couldn't do X, but you should have done Y, and you failed to do that.
Right.
Then that's on you,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
you did not recognize that was happening, and you did not utilize a different technique. That's more on you. So it's like you just have to measure those things, I think. And then, you know, also saying, okay, like my hip is a thing I can't fully control, but I can do strength training. I can go back and I can do more physical therapy to kind of work on those things. I can work more on mobility work, like, you know, stretching and that sort of thing, so that I'm in the best shape possible with whatever limitation I have for the next competition, the next time I'm rolling in the gym, the next time I'm drilling at home, whatever it is.
Yeah.
No matter how big or little. So I think it's just a combination. You know, was my hip 90% of the problem, or was it 10% of the problem and 90% of the problem was technique?
Right. Right.
And again, it's just using it as data again. And if you're having a hard time sussing that out, I think a coach can sometimes help, or someone outside of you, but also you know what's going on with your body, so you have a real sense of it. I think one thing that drives me really crazy is when people use these things as excuses, which I think is what your question was getting at. People do this a lot with like cardio. They go on vacation for a week or two and they come back and they're like, oh my God, my cardio is trash from not training. And it's like your cardio literally physically does not depreciate at that rate.
Right. It doesn't.
It doesn't. I'm not saying coming back from vacation isn't hard. You kind of have to like reacclimate, whatever. But like
It actually scientifically does not ruin your cardio.
it's science. Like it doesn't, I know your cardio deteriorates faster than like your strength, for example, but not at that rate, friends. You know, you quit training jujitsu for 6 months or a year. That's different. But
Yeah.
like, and you haven't done anything else with your cardio in that time, you're going to see something. But you go on vacation for a week or two. No. So yeah, just like being real with yourself also is important, and not using those things as excuses.
Yeah.
Like I have good cardio, but like I sometimes don't breathe when I'm in top positions. That's me.
Yeah.
If you don't have oxygen, then like
you can't. Your cardio is going to be trash if you don't.
then
have
your
oxygen.
cardio is trash. So like my cardio objectively is like actually pretty good. I'm like decently physically fit. But if you don't breathe, then like the whole system starts to fail. That's a me problem. That's not a my cardio is trash. That's I need to do something different, right? That like I'm screwing up. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think what you're saying makes sense. I was actually going to ask you, did you notice that you weren't breathing, or did did you need someone to tell you that you weren't?
I think it was both. I was getting really out of breath working passing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I do it as much with passing. I still do it on top. Actually, I probably do it with passing sometimes. It depends. Like if I'm workshopping something and I'm thinking, I actually stop breathing, which is fun. So in guard, I'm very chill.
Yeah.
Or if someone passes my guard and they're on top of me, I mean, how many years do you spend as a white belt getting your guard passed and getting smashed, right? Like,
yeah.
So I'm really chill in those positions. I'm chill on bottom. And then in the positions I'm in where I have to think harder, I sometimes don't breathe. So a combination.
Right. It would actually be wise if you did breathe, because your brain needs the oxygen.
Everyone's brain, but especially mine.
Well, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean specifically you, but I meant just if you're trying to think, breathing would help.
Yes, it would help. But I don't. And
Yes,
then I'm
yeah.
like, I don't feel great.
I don't feel good.
Yeah, this sucks. And then I'm like literally like drilling, like passing, and I'm like looking at Jacob going, you know, like,
And he's like, brother.
he's like, can you chill? And I'm like, I'm literally not breathing. So it's been both. I kind of noticed it because
Yeah.
of that. And I'm like, my cardio is fine. What am I doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm holding my breath. And also being told, hey, breathe helps. All right. So we've alluded to this a few times, but you know, the goal ultimately is unconscious competence. So like, let's talk about the 4 stages of competence in terms of learning. And this is only one learning theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, first we have unconscious incompetence. And it's not as bad as what it sounds like. It's not like I don't know what's going on at all, but it's you don't know what you don't know
Right.
is more the idea. So I'm not even thinking like brand new white belt. This could be, you know, at any level, not being able to recognize what you're doing wrong at all and what's kind of happening. Like something's just not clicking for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't necessarily like a skill level thing. It's just a particular thing not clicking with you. And then kind of the next level, which is I think where most people probably are at, is conscious incompetence. I shouldn't say where most people are at, but where most people get stuck, right? Like it's easy to kind of move past this isn't clicking with me to, okay, I get it, but I'm in conscious incompetence where I recognize what's wrong, but I'm struggling to fix it. And this happens all the time where I'm like, I hear you, especially in like privates. I'm like, I hear you. I see what you're doing. I feel what you're doing. I see what I'm doing, and I can't get my hips there. And I hear what you're saying about how to get my hips there.
But I can't.
And I see how you're doing it once again. And I felt how you were doing it. But this loop continues. And it's like seeing the problem, you know, the first stage is you can't even see that. You're like, what am I doing wrong? And then this is the most frustrating stage, I think.
I think so too.
Right? Where you're like, but why? Like, what is happening? So you can see that there's a problem and you just like cannot fully fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And then conscious competence is like you can do the thing, but it requires thought and effort. And I think that is where the majority of people, when they do things well, land.
Mm-hmm.
I think the much higher thing that we're trying to reach is unconscious competence, where you are reacting instinctively and, you know, executing technique with precision, and you're not needing to think really like at all. You just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my biggest problem with you when we first started training together, right? Is I would ask, what did you do? And you're like, I don't know. And I just thought for the longest time you didn't want to help me get better. And I'm like, you've been training literally like how much longer than me? A long time longer than me.
How long have you been training?
I don't remember.
Like 5 years?
Meaningfully, a little over 5.
So
It
I've
doesn't
been
really
training
matter.
12 years.
Okay, so a lot longer than me.
Yeah.
More than double. And I'm like, you've been training this much longer than me. Don't be a jerk. Help me out.
And now
I now understand that it is like unconscious competence. You really don't know what you're doing sometimes in roles.
I don't.
And where you really can improve and like reflect is the areas you're not as good at. But like if I ask you what you're doing, remember I asked you if you'd teach wrestle up?
Yeah.
Like your wrestling is so good.
Oh, thank you.
And you were like, I have no idea what I do
I don't.
at all. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll talk through what you're doing. You do the thing because you do it better than me. And we like tag teamed it, but like,
Yeah, I just don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. But that's kind of where you want to be because like the more you're able to shut your brain off and just do the thing, the more you can, because you're not going to be like that with everything. Then the more you're able to focus on the things that you have conscious competence with, that you have to think about and put more intentionality into. So like a good example of it is we do things simultaneously. So I taught guard retention for several weeks, most recently, to a women's class that I teach. And, you know, I said, hey, we're doing guard retention in a vacuum. But the reality is you're actually doing both at one time. You are either attacking, like you're being offensive, or you're being defensive, right? Like you're actually responding to them trying to aggressively pass and attack you. But you have to retain your guard the entire time you're being offensive. But ideally, your brain's able to kind of shut off and do that so that you can attack.
Right.
It's when you can't focus on both at the same time because you don't have unconscious competence with one that people struggle. And I think it would work with, this would apply to things besides guard.
Yes, yeah.
But like in guard, if you have to spend so much mental energy worried on how you retain your guard, and you also are not really, really good at hitting that submission, it's really hard for your attention to go to both at one time. Right? So that's kind of what we mean by that is like, you know, if you can even get to it with one thing where let's say like you really, really understand how to do, you know, an arm bar from guard in your sleep and you understand all the pieces of it, but you kind of are struggling with like getting past off of it. You can really focus on like the positional control and like the retention piece because you know exactly how to switch your hips, get the grip. You know what I mean? Like if you know like that part or vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important. Why do you think people get stuck between like 2 and 3, between that like conscious incompetence where they're having a hard time fixing things and where they can get to a point where they're able to recognize and actually like fix the things that they are not good at?
I mean, I think it would just be kind of what we've been talking about, lack of self-awareness and understanding of
What's going on?
what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of just...
Yeah.
You have to be able to address your weaknesses. And if you don't know them or understand your weaknesses or your strengths, then how are you going to move past those two stages?
Yeah, I agree. Is there maybe a technique or a concept that took you a really long time to move from conscious competence to unconscious competence?
No, I'm just pretty good. Yeah, I'm just that good.
You're just that good. Everything's just come that perfectly and naturally to you.
No,
I just was wondering if there's like one in particular that you think was a lot of work.
I mean, being able to, I feel like I can throw up triangles almost anywhere, whether it be top or bottom.
Yeah, that's true.
And that didn't happen overnight. Like it took a long time to get to the point where I just understand triangle mechanics to the point where I feel comfortable throwing them even if I'm not necessarily in a great position to do so. And I can at least lock up a triangle guard and feel good about it. So that would probably be the technique if I had to pick one. What about you? Do you have one?
I actually think that like leg pummeling
That's a good one.
is actually very intellectually challenging. Whether that's like guard retention, leg pummeling, or that's actually leg entries and or like leg attacks, because I think it could be all three or a combination of them. I think that there are certain things you understand like conceptually and you just apply concepts and then you do something wrong and you get punished for it. And then there's like specific technique, if that makes sense. Like you learn really specifically, here is how I enter I keep using K guard as an example.
Yeah.
K guard, and here are like the ways I do that. And that's like technique. And then there's just a concept of like maintaining inside position and like how to leg pummel in general. And those are kind of separate. And I think that for me, I think sometimes like that stuff, I think being a guard player and attacking legs gets a bad rap. And I know that not everyone thinks that it's challenging. But I think it's actually the reason like I really like it a lot. Aside from the fact that right now I have vertigo and like staying on my back's great. Aside from that, I think for me it's been one of the more intellectually challenging things that I've learned. And I think it continues to be really intellectually challenging. I think that maintaining like the leg pummeling, maintaining control of the hip and the knee line is very nuanced. And I think the finishing mechanics are very nuanced. I love arm bars. I like to think I'm good at arm bars at this point. I hope that that's a thing that's seen. I don't know. I don't know what people think. Aside from you, I have no idea what anyone thinks.
I know your arm bars are good.
But like I put a lot of effort into my arm bars. I don't find them as challenging to finish. Like I don't think the finishing mechanics are as precise as a heel hook. Or even honestly a straight ankle. And I can say that because I have a lot of people do really, really bad leg attacks on a repeated basis. Just because you can catch something does not mean you can actually finish it on someone who has good escapes and or isn't afraid of it and isn't going to tap to it just because they don't know what it is. So for me, that's my answer. I still think that I'm struggling through it. So I don't know that I fully have unconscious competence with all aspects of it, but the pummeling piece of it, I think is something I do pretty intuitively.
All right. Yeah.
Because I just know conceptually what position I need to go to. If that makes sense.
I think it makes sense.
That was a very long-winded answer.
I liked it.
And I went on my leg lock soapbox. If you had ever told me, especially like having started at like a predominantly gi gym, that I was going to be a dirty leg locker.
Yeah.
Never would have guessed. Or that you would have ever told me that I'd prefer a no-gi as a gi guard player. Like
that is how you started.
Yeah. Wild. But here we are.
Yes. Yeah. So kind of to wrap all of this up, growth requires honesty. And so you can't improve if you can't see where you are currently. And I think that's important for everybody to know. Self-awareness isn't about recognizing weakness. It's also about knowing what's working so you can build from that.
All right, so it's time for questions for each other. So my question for you is, can you think of a time in training where a lack of self-awareness, either in yourself or a training partner, led to a plateau or struggle? This is kind of similar to the question we asked earlier, but what finally helped shift that perspective? So let's say not training partner, because that's how we answered it earlier. You, where you've not lacked self-awareness with something.
Where I have lacked self-awareness?
Yes.
Okay.
English is hard. And it's really taken like either you recognizing something after a hard period of time or someone else really pointing something out.
Can I say arm bars again?
You really think that that's something you just didn't recognize?
I mean, I recognized it was happening in tournaments. It wasn't happening in the gym. And if it was...
Were people just not armbarring you?
I'm not really sure. I think they could have been. And it just like wasn't clicking that maybe that's the submission I was getting hit with the most until a collective of people explained to me that I was getting armbarred all the time.
You know, obviously people are individuals, but also gyms have specific like things they do. You know what I mean? Like kind of based on what your coach does. I just wonder if maybe like people weren't armbarring a ton, because I feel like aside from Risser, who armbars? Or even back then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like probably a lot of chokes.
Yeah, a lot of chokes.
Or leg attacks from some of them, maybe a no-gi, but like, I don't know. Like were people really even... I don't feel like I get hit by arm bars either. And I don't know if it's because I'm badass. I just think people aren't like going for them.
Yeah.
I know Risser's going to break my arms though.
She will.
Was that a question?
No.
Oh, no.
that was a direct, she will break your arm.
Yeah. Like I know she's going to go for them, right? But like, I don't know that other people are even trying.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just trying to defend you. Maybe you just weren't getting hit with them in the gym.
I don't remember, but it took a collective of people to tell me that this was happening to me in competition regularly, and it needed to be worked on.
I mean, I had something similar though, right?
Yeah.
I got darsed and they were not finished, but I got darsed off of my guard pull in competition and it wasn't happening in the gym
Yeah.
at all because either people were like not immediately diving in off the pull or I wasn't pulling, right? I was starting not off of a pull, sometimes just seated. And then I went and at one competition got darsed a couple times and I'm like, oh crap. And I'd worked really, really hard because it used to happen to me a lot from half guard. I'd worked really hard on not getting out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the skill set at the time
Yeah.
to be able to deal with it, but I wasn't starting off the matches on a good foot and it was actually going downhill from there. It was bad. I got guillotined off of a guard pull. So like in no-gi, I just really struggled with my no-gi pull.
Mm-hmm.
And it took not a person, but it took competition rather than the gym for me to recognize that because I
See
didn't know.
that.
Because if anything, I'm like, oh, I'm a guard puller, I'm a gi guard puller. Like my guard pull's great. Like I never had an issue with a guard pull.
And then that was happening.
My dear friends, pulling in no-gi is very different from pulling in gi. Very different. And that detached, even if you get like a grip and you sit and you're not just fully detached,
Yeah.
brother, it's not the same as having like a sleeve and a lapel. It's not.
It's not the same.
It's gross. It's awful.
I was going to ask you the same question, but you answered that for me. Thank you. So my question for you is, do you have a camp or anything coming up that you're excited to go to?
Oh, are we just going into the coming ups immediately?
No, I was just plugging
Our camp
our
again?
camp.
Yeah, so we're basically at capacity for the Les Roll Queer Grappling Camp, which is April 4th through the 6th. I'm not saying everyone's not welcome. Snag a spot while we still have some. But I would like to particularly pitch to our friends who are like, I'm going to come, I just haven't registered yet, as well as the people who've maybe come in the past who haven't registered or, like people who are like planning on it or like at what I've considered capacity. I've called it and said we were sold out before. I also recognize that we have some wiggle room. So I have not done that yet where I've firmly, at a point I will have to firmly cut it off. So if you're wanting to come, not to put the pressure on, but now is the time to register before we do have to finally call it and cut it off. But it's $120 for the entire weekend, which is really, really cheap for 10 hours of seminars. We have 4 super fights that are happening, including one with you.
What? Yes.
Yeah. And we have lots of really cool, we have like swag bags. We have lots of really cool donations from different companies. We have a raffle, so you can always win things, which is really cool. We do a gear swap.
Mm-hmm.
We do lots of things. Open mats. People hang out outside of the gym and outside of training too. Usually some gay bars that are visited.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it's just a really good time. And it's really, really good for members of the community. I think especially in our current climate to commune with one another.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds cheesy, but I really do mean that. And I think that now more than ever, coming to a camp like this, participating in it, and having that sense of community is invaluable.
I would agree.
So we'd love to see you there.
Yeah. Fun fact, this is the first camp I'm actually going to get to fully participate in.
Oh, yeah, because you had your hip surgery. So you were in a wheelchair
Yes.
year 1, and then you were pregnant year 2,
Mm-hmm.
and you were just very out of breath. I had to talk through your session.
I did my best.
Yeah, which isn't completely abnormal.
Yeah.
So you get anxious about talking, period, but then like you literally like
Physically could not breathe.
physically could not breathe. So I'm like, I'm just going to talk for Andrea. All right. So aside from camp, what do we have coming up?
Coming up, IBJJF Indie Open, and that's March 8th through the 9th. That's actually this weekend, and I will be competing on Saturday, so the 8th,
Ingy.
in the gi. We also have Les Roll Queer Grappling Camp, and that's in Fishers, Indiana.
So the thing we just mentioned.
We did just mention that, yes, April 4th through the 6th. And then we will be at Role Model Women's Only Grappling Camp, and that's in July.
And I didn't write the dates down.
I don't have the dates for that, but
I don't know. It's sometime in July.
You can find
We did our
it.
best. Sorry,
You can
friends.
find it, and I think I said it last month or last week's whatever podcast we did last. I said the dates.
Jesus, this went downhill right at the end. All right, where can people find us?
People can find the podcast LesRollRadio.com and at Les Roll Radio on TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Instagram. We have a Discord link in the bio. You can find me, Andrea Shennigy, at Shennigy A, and my beautiful wife, Kelly, at Kelly Shennigy on TikTok, Blue Sky, and Instagram.
All right, thanks, friends.
Bye.